Janitors mock an admiral. Then learn the legend of the lone buffer. Chapter 1. Lunch with the Admiral. The mess hall of the Rising Dawn hummed with the usual midday chaos, clattering trays, half-heated debates about engine efficiency, and the faint smell of reconstituted tomato soup that no one could ever quite explain. At a corner table, the one with the best view of the starfield, Fleet Admiral Susan Starling sat with her 10-year-old daughter, Gwen. Susan's hair, usually pinned in the severe twist expected of a fleet commander, was down for once, falling softly around her shoulders. Gwen, swinging her legs under the table, was animatedly explaining the plot of a Hollow series about a heroic space hamster who saved planets using only courage and a suspiciously powerful wrench. Susan listened with the kind of focus she reserved for tactical briefings. "So then," Gwen said, eyes wide, "the hamster jumps onto the reactor core and says, 'Not today, villain!' And then, he reroutes the plasma flow using the wrench," Susan finished, smiling. Gwen gasped. "You watched ahead." "I would never," Susan said, though her expression betrayed her guilt. Fleet regulations allowed family aboard during long voyages, a policy born from the understanding that even admirals were human, and sometimes humanity needed its children close. For Susan, a single mother balancing the weight of command and the weight of motherhood, these lunches were sacred. Unfortunately, they were also public. At a nearby table, 3 janitors, Griggs, Martin, and Tully, shoveled food into their mouths with the enthusiasm of men who believed chewing was optional. They watched the Admiral with a mixture of curiosity and misplaced bravado. "Look at her," Griggs muttered. "Hair all perfect, sitting there like she's in a recruitment poster." Martin snorted. "Bet she's never cleaned anything in her life." Tully nodded, mouth full. "Officers don't clean, they delegate to the lesser mortals like us. It's a rule." Gwen glanced over, hearing the laughter. "Mom, are they talking about you?" Susan didn't turn her head. "They're talking near me. That's different." "But they're being rude." Susan reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. "People often are when they don't know the whole story." Gwen frowned. "What story?" Susan smiled softly, the kind of smile that held a secret. "One I'll tell you when you're older." Across the room, the janitors continued their commentary, blissfully unaware that the woman they mocked once held an academy nickname, whispered with equal parts awe and fear. Lone Buffer. The cadet who could make a floor shine so brightly instructors had to issue anti-glare goggles. The phantom cleaner of the Rising Dawn. But for now, she was just a mother having lunch with her daughter, letting the universe be simple for a moment. And the janitors, well, they were about to learn the whole story. Chapter 2. The Ship That Cleaned Itself. The Rising Dawn was not merely clean the next morning. It was immaculate. Deck plates gleamed like polished silver. Bulkheads reflected passing crew like chrome mirrors. Even the notoriously grimy junction behind the waste recycler, a place engineers jokingly called the Abyss, smelled faintly of citrus. Lieutenant Adina Dorn, operations officer and veteran of 3 deep space tours, stared at the spotless corridor with a frown. "This is impossible," she muttered. Ensign Pell, carrying a diagnostic slate, nodded. "Ma'am, I ran the logs twice. The janitors weren't anywhere near this deck last night." "Where were they?" Pell hesitated. "Mess hall. For 4 hours." Dorn pinched the bridge of her nose. "Of course they were." She crouched, touching the deck. The polish was smooth, flawless, and unmistakably hand-buffed. No drone could achieve this level of shine. Drones were efficient, not obsessive. She stood, scanning the corridor again. Someone cleaned this, someone very good at it. Pell swallowed. "Ma'am, do we have a ghost?" Dorn gave him a look. "This is a Starship, Ensign. We don't have ghosts." But she didn't sound convinced. Meanwhile, in the mess hall, the three janitors basked in undeserved glory. Griggs slapped a commendation patch onto his sleeve. "Another one! Says our sanitation standards are fleet exemplary." Martin puffed out his chest. "We're legends." Tully nodded solemnly. "We're practically artisans." Gwen, passing by with her mother, overheard them. She tugged Susan's sleeve. "Mom, they didn't clean anything yesterday. I saw them playing holo cards." Susan gave her daughter a gentle, knowing smile. "Sometimes people take credit for things they don't do." Gwen frowned. "But that's not fair." "No," Susan agreed softly. "It isn't." The janitors didn't notice the Admiral walk past. They were too busy congratulating themselves. That night, Dorn set a trap. She placed microsensors along Deck 7, the deck that always seemed to shine the brightest, and synced them to her console. If anyone entered the corridor, she'd know. At 0200 hours, her console chimed. Motion detected. She sat up, heart pounding. Identity, unknown. Location, Deck 7, Section C. Duration, 0 hours, 0 minutes, 3 seconds, 3 seconds. Then nothing. She replayed the sensor feed. The corridor lights flickered once, just once, and when they stabilized, the deck was gleaming. Again. Dorn whispered, "What in the stars?" She checked the janitor's location logs. All three were asleep in their quarters. She checked the cleaning drones, all inactive. She checked the security cams, static. Someone, or something, was cleaning the ship with impossible precision, leaving no trace except perfection. The next morning, Gwen woke early and wandered into the corridor outside their quarters. She found her mother kneeling on the floor, hair tied back, quietly wiping a smudge from the baseboard with a cloth. "Mom," Gwen whispered, "why are you cleaning? Don't you have Admiral things to do?" Susan smiled without looking up. "I like things to be in order. It helps me think." "But the janitors are doing their best," Susan said gently. Gwen tilted her head. "Are they?" Susan paused, then met her daughter's eyes. "Sometimes people need time to grow into the responsibilities they're given." Gwen considered this. "Is that why you're helping them?" Susan didn't answer. She simply stood, pocketed the cloth, and smoothed her uniform. "Come on," she said. "Breakfast." As they walked away, the corridor lights caught the floor at just the right angle, revealing a shine so perfect it looked like starlight trapped beneath their feet. By midday, rumors spread through the ship. The decks are cleaner than regulation allows. The janitors must be superhuman. No, it's a ghost, a sanitation ghost. I heard it's a classified cleaning drone. I heard the Admiral herself is doing it. Don't be ridiculous. Admirals don't clean. Gwen overheard that last one and nearly choked on her juice. Susan simply sipped her tea, eyes twinkling. The mystery deepened. The ship gleamed brighter. And the janitors, blissfully unaware of the storm approaching, continued to accept praise for work they never did. The rising dawn was becoming the cleanest ship in the fleet. And the truth was about to break wide open. Chapter 3. The Battle of the Broken Star. The rising dawn was 3 hours out from the Hellion drift when the alarms hit. A shrill, rising wail cut through the ship, the kind of alarm that meant not a drill, not a skirmish, but war. Gwen clutched her mother's sleeve as the mess hall lights shifted to crimson. "Mom?" Susan Starling's expression changed in an instant. The softness vanished. The warmth dimmed. What remained was steel. "Stay with Lieutenant Dorn," she said, already rising. "Go! Now!" Gwen nodded, swallowing hard, and ran. Susan turned toward the nearest lift, her stride lengthening, her voice already issuing orders through her wrist comm. "Bridge, this is Starling. Report." Captain Redding's voice crackled through. "Admiral, Tarnakian armada emerging from warp. 23 ships, heavy cruisers and dreadnoughts. Formation. Encircling the convoy. They're going for the transports." Susan stepped into the lift. "Not today." The doors closed. Space outside the rising dawn erupted in fire. Tarnakian warships, jagged obsidian-black constructs with glowing red fissures, tore into real space like claws ripping through fabric. Their weapons lit the void with violent bursts of plasma and ion fire. The convoy of civilian transports scattered in panic. The rising dawn surged forward, engines roaring. On the bridge, Susan strode to the command dais, hair whipping as the ship shook under the first barrage. "Shields at 92%, Redding reported. "Bring us between the convoy and the Tarnakian line," Susan ordered. "All batteries, target their lead dreadnought." The tactical officer hesitated. "Ma'am, that ship is twice our mass." "Then we'll hit it twice as hard." Her voice was calm, absolute. The rising dawn fired. A full broadside of plasma lances streaked across the void, slamming into the Tarnakian dreadnought's hull. The enemy ship retaliated instantly, unleashing a barrage that hammered the rising dawn with bone-shaking force. The deck lurched, consoles sparked. A junior officer was thrown to the floor. "Damage report!" Susan barked. "Hull breach on deck 14. Emergency bulkheads holding." "Keep firing." The battle intensified. Explosions blossomed across the star field like dying suns. Tarnakian fighters swarmed like metallic hornets, strafing the convoy. Federation escorts struggled to hold formation. Susan watched it all with razor-sharp focus. "Helm, roll us 90 degrees. Tactical, concentrate fire on their ventral cannons." The ship twisted, dove, and unleashed a blistering salvo that tore through the dreadnought's underbelly. The enemy ship shuddered, venting molten metal. A cheer rose from the bridge. Susan didn't smile. "Next target." The Tarnakian armada shifted tactics, converging on the rising dawn. "They're focusing fire on us," Redding warned. "Good," Susan said. "Let them." The ship shook violently as multiple beams struck the shields. Panels blew out. Smoke filled the air. "Shields at 40%! "Reinforce forward arc," Susan ordered. "Helm, bring us into the nebula's edge." The helmsman blinked. "Ma'am, the ion storms will blind their targeting sensors. Do it." The rising dawn plunged into the swirling violet haze of the nebula. Lightning arced across the hull. The ship groaned under the strain, but the Tarnakian ships followed, and their sensors flickered. "Now," Susan whispered. "Tactical. Fire everything." The rising dawn erupted with light. Missiles, plasma bursts, ion torpedoes. A storm of firepower tore through the nebula, ripping into the disoriented Tarnakian ships. One cruiser exploded in a brilliant flash. Another spiraled out of control, hull cracking apart. The tide turned. But the Tarnakian dreadnought still lived. It emerged from the nebula like a wounded beast, weapons glowing with murderous intent. "Admiral," Redding said quietly, "if that thing fires its main cannon..." "It won't." Susan stepped forward, eyes locked on the massive ship. "Helm, bring us nose to nose." The bridge fell silent. "That's suicide," someone whispered. Susan didn't blink. "Trust me." The rising dawn surged forward, engines screaming. The dreadnought charged its main cannon, energy building in a blinding red sphere. "Steady," Susan murmured. The sphere grew brighter. "Steady." The dreadnought fired. "Now! Hard dive!" The rising dawn dropped like a stone. The enemy beam shot overhead, missing by meters, and striking one of its own cruisers behind it. The cruiser detonated. The shock wave slammed into the dreadnought, destabilizing its core. Susan raised her hand. "All batteries, finish it off!" The rising dawn unleashed a final, devastating barrage. The dreadnought exploded in a star-bright burst, fragments scattering like burning embers across the nebula. Silence fell. Then cheers erupted across the bridge. The remains of the Tarnakian armada broke formation and fled. The convoy was safe. Hours later, Gwen found her mother in the quiet of the observation deck, staring out at the drifting debris. "You won," Gwen whispered. Susan knelt, pulling her daughter close. "We protected the people who needed us. That's what matters." Gwen looked up at her. "You were amazing." Susan smiled softly. "I just did my job, honey." But the crew saw more than that. They saw a commander who led them through hell and brought them home. They saw courage, brilliance, and impossible calm. They saw the first hint of a legend. And soon, they would learn the rest. The lone buffer was about to be revealed. Chapter 4. The Clean Slate. The battle was over, but the rising dawn bore the scars. Corridors were scorched, bulkheads dented. Medical teams rushed the wounded to triage bays. The air carried the metallic tang of burnt circuitry and the heavy silence that followed loss. And for the first time in their careers, the three janitors, Griggs, Martin, and Tully, were actually needed. They hated it. Lieutenant Dorn found them hiding in a storage closet behind stacked crates of disinfectant they had never once opened. She crossed her arms. "You three, out. Now." Griggs peeked out. Is the battle over?" "Yes," Dorn said, "and the ship needs cleaning, real cleaning, not the kind you pretend to do." Martin groaned. "But we're, sanitation logistics specialists." "You're janitors," Dorn said flatly, "and the decks are covered in aftermath." Tully whimpered. "Can't the drones do it?" "The drones are busy repairing hull breaches. You're all we've got." The three men exchanged looks of pure dread, but they shuffled out. Slowly. The corridors were a mess. Not catastrophic, but far beyond anything the janitors had ever bothered with. Medical teams had left trails of dried blood, emergency foam, and the faint stains of triage work. Equipment lay scattered. The ship felt wounded. Griggs gagged. This is awful." Martin poked a mop at a dark smear. "What even is this?" Tully stared at a dropped med patch. "I think it's looking at me." They worked. Badly. They smeared instead of scrubbed. They pushed debris into corners. They used the wrong solutions on the wrong surfaces. At one point, Griggs tried to clean a wall panel with a food service wipe. After 2 hours, the corridor looked worse. Lieutenant Dorn returned, surveyed the disaster, and pinched the bridge of her nose. "This," she said slowly, "is not cleaning. This is vandalism." Griggs shrugged helplessly. "We're doing our best." "No," Dorn said. "You're doing your minimum." That night, the ship slept. The janitors collapsed in their bunks, exhausted from doing the bare minimum for the first time in years. But the rising dawn did not rest. At 0300 hours, the corridor lights flickered. A soft hum filled the air. The sound of someone working with quiet, practiced precision. A cloth swept across a bulkhead. A brush glided along the deck. A hand buffed a panel until it gleamed like starlight. By dawn, the ship was spotless. Not just clean, perfect. The kind of perfection that required discipline, patience, and a deep, almost meditative devotion to order. The kind of perfection only one person aboard could achieve. At the morning briefing, the officers gathered around Admiral Susan Starling. Gwen sat beside her, reading one of her favorite Admiral books, proud and oblivious to the storm about to break. Captain Redding cleared his throat. "The ship is clean again." A murmur rippled through the room. Dorn stepped forward. "Ma'am, The janitors didn't do it. Their logs show they were asleep. Susan raised an eyebrow. Do they? Dorn nodded. Yes, ma'am. And the cleaning compound used was the same as before. The Fleet Academy formula. The room fell silent. Everyone knew. Everyone had suspected. But now it was undeniable. Susan sighed softly. Very well. She stood, smoothing her uniform, and faced the officers. I was Cadet Susan Starling, she said. Academy class of 1889, nickname Lone Buffer. Gasps filled the room. Gwen beamed. I knew it. Susan continued, voice calm. I cleaned the academy floors because it brought me peace. I cleaned this ship for the same reason. Order is a comfort. Discipline is a refuge. She paused. And sometimes, people need help they don't know how to ask for. The officers exchanged looks, admiration, respect, and a touch of awe. The janitors were summoned. They shuffled in, pale and trembling. Griggs spoke first. Admiral, we're sorry. We hid during the battle. We didn't clean right. We took credit for your work. Susan regarded them with a steady, unreadable gaze. You were given responsibility, she said, and you ran from it. Martin swallowed. We can do better. Tully nodded vigorously. We'll learn, we promise. Susan's expression softened, just a little. I believe everyone deserves a clean slate, she said, but not without consequence. The janitors braced. You are being reassigned to Gorman 7, she continued. A mining colony. The workers there need janitors who understand the value of honest labor. The men sagged, not in anger, but in acceptance. It was fair, it was just, and it was merciful. Later, Gwen found her mother in the corridor outside their quarters, wiping a tiny scuff from the wall. Mom, she said, why do you still clean if you're the Admiral? Susan smiled, brushing a strand of brown hair behind her ear. Because, she said, no matter how high you rise, you should never forget how to take care of the world around you. Gwen nodded thoughtfully. Is that why you help the janitors? Susan paused, then knelt to meet her daughter's eyes. I help the ship, she said gently. The janitors will help themselves. Gwen hugged her. Susan hugged her back. And the rising dawn gleamed quietly around them, a ship kept spotless not by ghosts, but by the steady hands of a woman who believed that leadership began with humility. Chapter 5. The Moon of Second Chances. Gorman 7 was not a place for the faint of heart. The mining colony sat under a sky the color of bruised steel, its horizon broken by jagged machinery and the constant churn of dust storms. Every shift ended with miners stumbling into the sanitation bay coated in ore dust, hydraulic grease, and the kind of grime that seemed to have a personal vendetta. It was the janitor's new home. Griggs, Martin, and Tully stood in the sanitation bay on their first day, staring at the mountain of filth left behind by a single shift of miners. Griggs swallowed. This is impossible. Martin glared at him. It's your fault we're here. My fault? Griggs snapped. You're the one who said the Admiral probably doesn't even know what a mop is. Tully jabbed a finger at both of them. You two were the ones hiding in a closet during the battle. I was at least near the hallway. You were asleep, Martin shouted. I was meditating. You were snoring. The argument escalated quickly. Three men who had coasted for years suddenly forced to confront the reality of actual work. And worse, the reality of each other. They tried to clean. They really did. But the miners' grime was relentless. The dust clung to every surface. The grease smeared instead of lifting. The air smelled faintly of despair and industrial solvents. Griggs slopped cleaning solution everywhere. Martin used the wrong brush and scratched a wall panel. Tully tried to mop the ceiling. By the end of the shift, The sanitation bay looked like a crime scene committed by someone who hated cleanliness on a philosophical level. The miners walked in, took one look, and walked right back out. The next morning, the three janitors were at each other's throats. "You're useless!" Griggs shouted. "I'm useless?" Martin barked. "You're the one who thought pushing dirt into a corner counts as cleaning." Tully threw down his mop. "I'm done! I'm not working with either of you!" "You were never working in the first place!" Griggs yelled. They stormed off in 3 different directions, each convinced the others were the problem. For the first time in their lives, they were forced to face a truth they had spent years avoiding. They had never been a team. They had never taken pride in their work. They had never earned their commendations. And now, stripped of excuses, they turned on each other instead of turning inward. That night, the colony slept. The janitors did not. They lay awake in their bunks, stewing in resentment, each convinced he was the only competent one among the 3. But while they slept fitfully, something else moved through the sanitation bay. A soft hum, a quiet rhythm, the sound of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. By dawn, the bay was spotless, not just clean, pristine. The miners walked in and stopped in awe. The floors gleamed, the walls shone, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and discipline. Griggs, Martin, and Tully arrived moments later, jaws dropping. What happened?" Tully whispered. Martin looked around wildly. "Did one of you—" Griggs shook his head. No way." A miner stepped forward. "Whoever cleaned this deserves a medal." The janitors exchanged looks of pure panic. They knew that shine. They knew that perfection. They knew that formula, the lone buffer. Somewhere, somehow, Admiral Susan Starling had found a way to send a message. You can run from responsibility. You can hide from work. But you cannot hide from the standard. The janitors stared at the gleaming bay, each feeling the weight of their failures settle on their shoulders. For the first time, none of them spoke. Back aboard the Rising Dawn, Gwen watched her mother polish a small scuff from the corner of a bulkhead. "Mom," she asked, "did you really clean the mining colony?" Susan smiled faintly. "I sent them a reminder." "Of what?" "That even in the hardest places," Susan said, "someone has to care enough to make things better." Gwen nodded. "Do you think they'll learn?" Susan paused, thoughtful. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe they'll just learn that running from your problems only makes them follow you." She stood, stowed her cloth away, and took her daughter's hand. "Either way," she added, "everyone deserves a clean slate. What they do with it is up to them." "Will you show me how to clean?" Gwen asked. "Sure," Susan answered. "We'll start later with your room." The Rising Dawn gleamed around them, a ship kept spotless not by ghosts, but by a woman who understood that leadership wasn't about power. It was about responsibility, and sometimes about reminding others of theirs. The end. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you.